Kremlinology. Stalinism's role in saving the humanity of man is discernible at the most elementary level of language. If the language of the new post-human being was to have been a language of signals, no longer properly representing the subject, no wonder that Stalinist language is the most violent imaginable opposite. What characterizes human language, in contrast to the most complex signals of bees, is what Lacan called empty speech. Speech whose denotative value, explicit content, is suspended on behalf of its function as an index of intersubjective relations between speaker and hearer. And this suspension is a key feature of Stalinist jargon, the object of the science of Kremlinology. Before the Soviet-era archives opened wide, foreign scholars trying to make out what had happened and what might come to pass took abuse for relying upon hearsay. So-and-so had heard from so-and-so, who in turn had heard from someone in the camps, who was sure that, insert fantastic particulars here. Critics of such hearsay scholarship had a point. But what few people seem to realize even now is that the salient issue might not be the reliability in Stalin's Soviet Union of word of mouth and political divination, but its pervasiveness. Kremlinology arose not at Harvard, but in and around the Kremlin. This was how the entire regime operated, and it was what everyone in the Soviet Union did to a degree, the more so the higher up. Amid the inter-ministerial warfare and Mobius strip intrigues, Stalinist life and death remained opaque, no matter where you stood or whom you knew. It was at the same time formulaic and indeterminate. In April 1939, the nominal head of Comintern, Georgy Dimitrov, frets over his sudden omission in Pravda's coverage of one honor presidium and in Izvestias of another. His agitation eases when he learns that his portraits were borne aloft at the May Day parade, which quieted the ominous chit-chat about him. But then it happened again. For the first time on International Women's Day, I was not elected to the honor presidium, he records on March 8, 1941. That, of course, is no accident. But what did it mean? Dimitrov, who could scarcely have been closer to the Kremlin, was an inveterate Kremlinologist, studying mausoleum choreography, divining omens, drowning in rumors. Another comical detail along these lines: the public prosecutor in the show trial against the United Trotskyite Zinoviev Center published a list of those that this center was planning to assassinate: Stalin, Kirov, Zdanov. This list became a bizarre honor, since the inclusion signified proximity to Stalin. Although Molotov was on good personal terms with Stalin, he was shocked to discover that he was not on the list. What could this sign mean? Just a warning from Stalin, or an indication that soon it would be his turn to be arrested? Here, indeed, the secrets of the Egyptians were secrets also for the Egyptians themselves. It was the Stalinist Soviet Union which was the true empire of signs. A story told by Soviet linguist Erich Han-Pira provides a perfect example of the total semantic saturation of this empire of signs, a saturation which, precisely, relied on the emptying of direct denotative meaning. For many years, when the Soviet media announced the funeral ceremonies of a number of senior nomenklatura, it used a cliché formulation: buried on Red Square by the Kremlin wall. In the 1960s, however, because of the lack of space, most of the newly deceased dignitaries were cremated and urns with their ashes were placed in niches inside the wall itself. Yet the same old formula was used in press statements. This incongruity compelled 50 members of the Russian Language Institute of the Soviet Academy of Sciences to write a letter to the Central Committee of the Communist Party, suggesting that the phrase be modified to fit the current reality. The urn with ashes was placed in the Kremlin wall. Several weeks later, a representative of the Central Committee phoned the Institute, informing them that the Central Committee had discussed their suggestion and decided to keep the old formulation. He gave no reasons for this decision. According to the rules that regulate the Soviet Empire of Science, the CC was right. The change would not have been perceived as simply registering the fact that dignitaries were now cremated and their ashes placed in the wall itself. Any deviation from the standard formula would have been interpreted as a sign, triggering frenzied interpretive activity. So, since there was no message to be delivered, why change things? One may oppose to this conclusion the possibility of a simple, rational solution. Why not change the formulation and add an explanation that it meant nothing, that it simply registered a new reality? Such a rational approach totally misses the logic of the Soviet Empire of Science, since in it everything has some meaning, even and especially a denial of meaning. Such a denial would trigger an even more frantic interpretive activity. It would have been read not only as a meaningful sign within a given, well-established semiotic space, but as a much stronger meta-semantic indication that the very basic rules of this semiotic space were changing, thus causing total perplexity, panic even. Some Soviet leaders retained a sense of irony and displayed a dark sense of humor with regard to this total plasticity of facts. When, in early 1956, Anastas Mikoyan flew to Budapest to inform the Hungarian ultra-Stalinist leader Matthias Rákosi of Moscow's decision to depose him, he told Rákosi, "The Soviet leadership has decided you are ill. You will need treatment in Moscow." It would be interesting to reread, from this perspective, the Model PostWar II Soviet textbook on dialectical materialism. Mark Rosenthal's The Marxist Dialectical Method, whose first edition appeared in Moscow in 1951. In later reprints, long passages were omitted or rewritten. However, these changes had nothing whatsoever to do with the author's further reflections on imminent philosophical problems. They are all to be read strictly in Kremlinological terms, as signals of the shifts in the ideologico-political line. The book, of course, relies on Stalin's systemization of the four main features of dialectical method: the unity of all phenomena, the dynamic nature of reality, the permanent development of reality, the revolutionary nature of this development, which proceeds through sudden jumps, not only through continuous gradual change, from which, significantly, the law of the negation is absent. See Stalin's On Dialectical and Historical Materialism. In the subsequent editions of Rosenthal's book, the description of these four main features subtly changes. At some point, the negation of the negation is silently readmitted, and so on and so forth. These changes are Kremlinological signals of the shifts in the ideologico-political constellation, the shifts of de-Stalinization which, paradoxically, began under Stalin himself at his instigation. See his two late essays on linguistics and the economy, which paved the way for recognizing the relative autonomy and independence from class struggle of some sciences. The fact that the negation of the negation is posited as a fundamental ontological feature of reality has thus nothing to do with the cognition of the world, and everything to do with the shifts in the ideologico-political constellation. Is then Kremlinology not a kind of obscene double of Sovietology? The latter studying the Soviet regime objectively through sociological data, statistics, power shifts, and so forth. The former as an obscure semiotic system.